Thank you, David Marchant. As usual, we have a period of questions from our media members, starting today with Siobhan Ryan.
Hello, it's Siobhan Ryan from The Australian. How much government funding do you think is needed in order for the rail sector to accommodate the increase in demand that's in your most probable scenario that you've modelled here today? That's my first question. And the second is, where do you stand on the debate on the fuel excise? Because some people are arguing that it should go down. What you're saying is that the road user charges aren't sufficient at present. Do you think it should increase?
In answer to the first part of the question, our submission to Infrastructure Australia goes through 3 scenarios, and today a 4th scenario: the high case, the medium case and the low case under each of the elements: oil, carbon, labour costs, etc. And today we've released the most probable case because we have now more information to actually make assessments around that. And that has, over a 15-year period, arisen a range of investment options for government, of which industry also needs to contribute. Those investment horizons range from $4 billion through to $8 billion, depending on which of the trajectories end up being correct. In that case, there also needs to be looked at issues with regard to the incentives in maybe bringing in depreciation allowances faster to have rail rolling stock brought in, which is more efficient to carry that framework by giving incentives such as the US do by accelerating depreciation. And we also need to look dramatically at our terminal capacities in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane to be able to do the interface between road and rail, because road has a very critical part to play and so does rail, but the interface between those must be made much smoother than they are. So the element in the medium term, over 15 years, the price can be between 5 and 8 billion, depending on what trajectory of growth really does take place, and secondly, the degree in which the industry should contribute to the repayment of some of the economic activity over an amortised period of time. So that's the order of magnitude. I'm probably going to give you an answer on fuel excise that you would expect, and that is, I think fuel excise needs to be retained. Fuel excise for trucks is in fact their only contribution to the road infrastructure they use apart from registration, and it's actually aimed to be a payment with regard to maintenance. However, my personal strong view, and I think Professor Garner reflects it, is that what we need to do is get smart as New Zealand has. It's a small island off our continent, but sometimes has great policy settings. They've moved to mass distance charging for trucks, where in fact, and they're about to adjust it, where a truck over 6 tonnes actually pays a distance per kilometre it uses and contributes to the infrastructure it uses, contributes at a higher rate. Because one of our distortions, which I was trying to get at, is that every road user contributes to roads maintenance costs, but the commercial road users, long-distance trucks, aren't contributing to the degree that they're getting the commercial benefit from it. And therefore, there's a malallocation of that. The second positive thing from mass distance charging with new technology is you can track the truck. You can see that, in fact, the driver's obeying the fatigue laws, you can see the speed limits being adhered to, and you can see if there's an accident and the truck falls over, exactly where it is and get emergency service there. You can track it live. And you also have the other benefit is you can then price it based on where it goes. So if in fact the truck is going into an area, a rural area that has no rail competition, and for social reasons we obviously want good transport, you would actually charge it less than where it's competing with another mode which is commercial. And therefore you can get a much smarter with regard to where you create your subsidies and get a better social outcome and financial outcome for the benefits you wish to distribute. So my view is the technology is alive and well today to actually move to mass distance charging and tracking of trucks, large trucks, not small trucks, large trucks, because effectively you'll get better targeted safety, you'll get better fatigue management, you'll get better occupational health and safety management, and lastly, you can actually target your taxes and incentives according to the market you're after, where in rural areas and other outlying areas you want an incentive for transport, you can subsidise it, but you don't have to subsidise 100% to actually target the areas you're after. I think that's the policy setting, and that's the policy setting Garner is suggesting, and the technologies around today, and we can use our money smarter and safer for everybody. So I think the medium term we can capture that technology and actually do better for everybody. It can't be difficult. New Zealand's done it.
Thank you. The next question is from Sophie Morris.
Sophie Morris from the Australian Financial Review. You spoke of the neglect of rail in the past decades. Is part of that because of the perversities of federation? Are there any sort of responsibilities there that need to be sorted out and should be taken full control by one level of government, the Commonwealth? Is there any sort of issues still there in federal-state relations that are impeding the sort of change you're talking about that is needed to put rail infrastructure on the footing that's required to take us forward?
The historical development of rail has been city-centric. Rail was developed to actually get the goods and services, our clothes and goods and services, to our major cities. And effectively the whole rail infrastructure was based on coming to big cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. And because our livelihood at that time was, our food, our clothing, actually came from the hinterlands. And it did a great job since Federation for the first 50 or 60 years. It wasn't built to actually have a national economy, it was built to be state and city-centric. And therefore we've laboured with the problem of how to create a national network in a growing marketplace, which is Australia, which is a globalised marketplace. The clothes you're wearing, the food you're eating, the great bulk of that comes from a range of different locations and around Canberra. In 1930s and 40s, it came from around Canberra and Sydney. So our rail network is city-centric. And what happened is we've been very slow to actually create a national network. The ARTC objective is to try and create an interstate standard gauge open access network from Brisbane through to Perth. We're still working on that, especially in Queensland and Western Australia. But, there's hope. The reality, though, is the technology to keep rail in the freight game had been dramatically distracted, especially in the last 25 years, because effectively the state governments were very much focused around their urban systems. Why? Urban systems vote, freight doesn't. And effectively, do they get a big benefit out of a national economic system that's interoperable between the states? They don't actually see that much benefit. So what happened is when they did start to invest in money on some of these country networks and something happened in the urban network, they correctly, in their view, brought the money back into the urban networks. Now, whether you think they did a good job or a bad job of that depends on which city you live in at the moment. But the reality is money was being diverted away from these sort of freight lines because they weren't seen as economic imperative or politically imperative as the urban systems are. The ARTC objective, and the reason I think the Commonwealth created the ARTC, was to actually have someone focused around these issues which had an economic imperative for the nation, and to negotiate with the states. And it's kind of humorous to have a company negotiate with the states when the Australian government could have been doing that framework as well. But that has been actually quite successful, strangely enough, perverse as it sounds. And I think our relationship in Victoria and New South Wales are reflecting that. There's a great bond between our movement forward and the state governments, and they see it as value-adding. But there was distraction. And what happened was, when they're all state-centric, the things got pulled to the urban systems. And therefore, you get 25 years of running it down to 45% reliability, temporary speed restrictions, etc., because it just didn't get the highlight in the state faces. There's obviously a bigger highlight nationally because it's all part of our national economic drive forward.